Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Better Events Podcast. In today's episode, we are getting spooky. We're thrilled for our episode topic. We are going to talk about monster-sized mistakes, phantom guests, and event ghost stories. So go ahead. Don't be too scared. We are going to talk about a lot of different funny examples and things like that. You can learn from some of our mistakes. We're going to talk about graveyards of ideas, monster-sized mistakes, phantom guests, technology tricks or treats, guests from the underworld, escaping the curse, and all of those wonderful things about events. And so let's go ahead and get into the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Logan Clements, and I'm joined by fellow co-host Mary Davidson. And this week, before we get into our spooky topic, because it's that time of year, Mary, we have a spooky conversation starter. If you had to spend the night in a haunted house, but you could bring one fictional character with you for protection, who would it be and why?
Okay, I admittedly have had some time to think about this. So I would say obvious answer, the Ghostbusters, right? Because this is their job, but that feels too obvious. So if I had to spend the night in a haunted house and bring a fictional character with me, Dumbledore. I feel like he could just save me from any situation. He's the man.
That's a mind link because Mary, you're like the obvious answer, and in my head, I was like Harry Potter. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's a spell for everything. You can just, yeah. I think I would have to go Harry Potter. Dumbledore's smart because he's more experienced than Harry, but I'd have to go Harry Potter. And listeners, I hate haunted houses. Like I used to joke when I was younger that I was like, it's not like in the cute way of like, oh, I'm scared, but like not really. No, I'm like terrified of haunted houses. I will do them under duress, but know that I usually need someone to just cling to, and or someone taught me the trick of wearing a hoodie backwards so that I could throw the hood over my face if I was terrified. So yeah, Mary, you're giggling at my pain, but not a
I hate
fan.
them too. That's the thing. I have anxiety just thinking about it. So I didn't know this about you, but long story short, you and I should never get put in a haunted house together.
I mean, I don't think we'd make it through the door. If you're equally as scared, I'd be like, we're not going.
No. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we love a good theme, as you all know. And this is a very themed episode, a little bit thanks to ChatGPT coming up, and you will see. But we picked this topic because it is similar to our event horror stories episodes that we've done on episode 28, episode 128, and now episode 178. So we have something with the eights and the horror story episodes. So that's very spooky. And we're excited for our conversation today. We wanted to do it again for this spooky season that we have coming up. And we'll get into our theme and our topics. It's going to be a fun discussion. And there are always lessons to be learned from our stories, our ghost stories, and our spooky stories.
Yeah, and before we get into it, Mary, we just want to remind you listeners, we are hosting the Better Events Conference this December 18th and 19th. The 18th is in person, the 19th is virtual. So we have both an all-access ticket that gets you both days and a virtual ticket only that just gets you Thursday the 19th. I am personally just so excited to both bring this community together. Those that have already made the purchase for the all-access ticket, we're excited to see some familiar faces and some new faces for our in-person gathering. And virtually, I just think, I love virtual events. That's not a surprise. So giving something that we're able to connect with you from home is just something that really, really excites us. So buy your tickets and join us. Visit bettereventspod.com/conference to get your tickets today. All right, Mary, it's now time to get spooky. I really like these like nuggets that you put here for our discussion. Listeners, we're gonna have some fun titles to these questions as we go. So our first one is Graveyard of Ideas. Ooh, what's the scariest idea that you or a client insisted on only to have it not turn out well? Mary, I'm gonna let you take this one.
Okay, this was one I actually had a hard time thinking about because I think that this probably happens like pretty often. So I'm just going to say something very simple. when they have an idea to have a photo booth. The end. I think photo booths are so silly. I don't think that they're cool anymore, and they just like aren't that exciting, and they're not that special. And so it's not a scary idea, but I feel like every single event wants a photo booth. They never really are that popular, and I'm just over it. So that's a graveyard of an idea that needs to stay in their graveyard. Maybe that's a hot take, but I do feel that photo booths are dead, and I think we've kind of talked about that before on here too.
For me, I feel like it would have to be, and I probably an example that I've shared in the past, but it goes back to like what we've talked about the podcast is episode 2, connecting with your why. And I had an event that I got brought in on that they were already wedded to this event concept. And yet their biggest critique from previous years when they've done this event concept for the past couple years was that they felt like the event was kind of disconnected from the mission. And this was their big fundraising event. So Mary, this is like the moment to be the most mission connected, and they felt like folks just came together to kind of get drunk and socialize and not necessarily think about the mission. And it was one of those where we were on a train that was already moving and we couldn't get them to change the track and go in a different direction. And once again, at the end of this year or end of that year, it wasn't a this year event, listeners, but at the end of that event, they had the same exact feedback. And it was one of those where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like the definition of insanity of doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And it was like my biggest piece of feedback was like something that is so broad, like the theme and the overall structure of the event. If that's broken, you need to fix that. No matter of like little tiny tweaks that we did here and there to like the smaller elements of the event, we're going to change that. So uh, it was just kind of a bummer because we came up with a lot of creative solutions and all of them got rejected because they needed to stay on this track, and it ended up not being successful. So if you're in the position of power to determine some of the key elements of your event, I want to make sure that you're connecting with your why and challenging that every year. Just because it worked last year doesn't mean it's a good fit for whatever you're looking for this year, no matter if it's a fundraising event or like a conference even. So I think that's an approach you and I have taken, Mary, with the Better Events Conference to try to challenge what we liked about last year, but also what's different.
I love it because it's always something that is like easy to forget, no matter how many times you talk about it or how important it is. So it's a great reminder, Logan. Our next chunk is monster-sized mistakes. So, Logan, can you share a moment when a small mistake has snowballed into something monstrous during an event, and how did you handle it? And if you need time to think, I have something that I could share first. Okay, I'll go first. So, uh, if you've done a fundraising event before, at the end, if you have like a bunch of auction items and things that people have won, at the end of the night, they have to pick up the items that they've won. In many cases, there was one event that we're a part of that literally has like 120 silent auction items, and they still do it. It's very successful for them. So they're like the one organization that's held on to it, and it's insane. So, like most of the event space is just filled with tables of auction items. So we have to do like a really quick turnaround and get them ready for checkout. But this is hundreds of items that we're trying to get sorted. And so we had high school volunteers that were helping us. And I was really grateful for them, except they did make a really big mistake, which was when we were stapling on the bags, what we were supposed to be stapling was the winner, like the winning bidder number. And then we were going to organize all of the winnings by bid number. So when somebody comes and they check out, they're like, I'm bid number 376. We can just go to the 376 spot and pick up all of their stuff. Well, we didn't catch it until it was all done with all 120 items, but they had put the package number of the item instead. And so we didn't know who won it in that case. Obviously, there's ways to figure out who won it. And so we had to like print a list and do all the things. But that meant that we had to have these student volunteers run like all around for all the multiple packages one person won out of all these 120 items. And it was such a mess. It looked terrible. First of all, it was like, visually the stuff was on the ground everywhere. Like it was awful. And I'm having anxiety just thinking about it, especially because this event is like 2 weeks away from today this year, because this happened last year. So I'm already like, oh my gosh, we have to make sure this is better. So I would say that was a pretty significant mistake because it affected a lot of other things that happened. So now we know to make sure our lovely volunteers know exactly what they are tasked to do. Logan, what's your story?
Gosh, Mary, yeah, I feel for you. I feel anxious. Just hearing that number of items is anxiety inducing. Yeah. And then yet, yes, the complex part of it. For me, I feel like a small one was the mistake that was made. Well, I guess let's say the scenario first, then I'll go back to highlight what the mistake was. But we are in one of my bigger corporate events that I have annually, and the CEO comes up on stage. We do his lovely voice of God, play his entry music. He walks on, and all of a sudden his mic's not working. And he's got a nice headset mic on, and he's fumbling for a second. And we sent our stage manager out right away to like look at the mic, being like, what happened? How did the mic? But it was such a big thing that it was one of those like, oh gosh, we're gonna have to talk about this afterward because everyone's gonna have questions. Granted, in the grand scheme of things, it lasted maybe 5-6 seconds. He had issues. We sent someone. It was troubleshot within 30 seconds. But the small mistake for why we got in that situation, there were multiple things that happened, but the initial one was that we realized the speaker, we mic'd him up probably 30 minutes before his session. He'd walked around and talked to people and been playing with the mic pack. Usually you put it to the back of your pants or anywhere like a back pocket. He had somehow fiddled with it, played with it, put it in his front pocket, and had been, I guess, messing around, just, nervous kind of hand energy, messed around with it and had turned his own mic off. And now this is something that I had never thought to ask our audio folks, but I've learned is pretty standard. And I now, burn me once, I'm going to ask you every project, is there's a thing called as like, you can lock a mic on, meaning the back of the room, your audio tech then would just control the mic on and off. But the pack itself or the handheld microphone can be locked on, meaning me as the speaker, I can hit all the buttons, push all the things. It won't turn the mic off. The only drawback to that, I would say, is probably for battery purposes. But again, so many of these events, you need new batteries for the whole day anyway. But anyway, I learned my lesson. It was such a simple thing. It was just a mistake that our A2, our second audio operator, who's the one who usually is miking up speakers, had just forgotten to do. And is something that person said they normally always do. And then it was just a freak occurrence, but that he forgot. Then the speaker also messed with the mic. Again, everybody was understanding, but it has turned into something that was like, I hate anything that becomes noticeable to attendees. And like, Mary, I don't know if your monster side mistake, you said it looked bad, but if it just looked bad to you guys or if attendees noticed, but that is one that like sits with me. And any event I work on, I just try to bring it up very nicely of like, I'm sure you already are doing this, but I just want to verbally confirm you are locking all of our mics on. I don't want the speaker to be able to turn it on and off. And I either get a yes, of course, or I get a, oh yeah, we can do that. So there's my pro tip for you listeners. If you didn't know it, you don't have to learn it the hard way like I did. Just tell people to lock your mics on.
It's so funny because when someone says something like that, like when you're saying that to like audio people from now on, it's like you've been burned. Like something's happened to Logan. Like she always says, and I feel like that's what happens to us a lot of the times. We have these experiences where we're like these things that we're saying, and we're like, okay, like this is not happening again. I love seeing people's contracts for the same reason because sometimes they're very specific, and you're like, okay, somebody has hurt you before. It's very clear. So you know what? We live.
That is my favorite question to people. I always go, who hurt you? Anytime or if I have somebody who's like overly anxious about something, I just want to be like, who hurt you? Somebody hurt you at some point, and you're not going to tell me, but it's definitely, and listeners, we say that in like I feel like it's a lighthearted way. We don't actually think people hurt you, but a lot of, yes, the anxieties that people have around events or some of the questions they ask, sometimes it's genuinely that they don't know, but if they're weirdly specific, it's definitely like there's something else there. They've done something to it.
Definitely.
All right. Our next one, Mary, this is phantom guests. Oh, so scary. Have you ever had to deal with a situation where a key speaker, vendor, or guest just vanished at the last minute? How did you bring them back from the dead, proverbial, not real, or cover their absence?
Oh, I think that this happens actually pretty often. But the two that were like pretty significant, Logan, I think you're probably gonna have a lot of good stories about this one. There's one I've shared before, so I'll just touch on it. You can go listen to one of our past episodes, but we had like a key performer for an event, and it was their foundation, and they had some family emergency and were not going to be able to come. Luckily, there were many other performances as part of the program, but they were like the key performer at the end of the night. So it would have been very, very disappointing for people if he was not there. But he came and it was okay, but we were like all ready to pivot the whole program. So that was not fun. And in that moment, I learned that you have to be really careful when you have a headliner in case something like that happens. Like, yeah, because it really, really affects your program. But this happened again recently for my colleague. She was working an event with the Imagine Dragons. She like did this little like side gig, not little, like it was a cool experience, side gig thing, and she brought this one up to me, and so I was like, oh, this will be a good one to share. But like they were an hour late, and so they had to just delay. And I actually we don't do concerts very often, so I'm not sure how often this happens. So if you do concerts and let me know. But like they were, obviously it was their concert and they were an hour late, and so they were starting to talk about like refunding people or what they needed to do, but they made it and everything was okay. But something about these known performers, I don't know what it is, but they're late a lot.
I mean, you hate to say it's a little bit maybe of a diva mentality, but yeah, phantom guests or phantom people. I think my first one that comes to mind is a vendor one was, and this is a good foreshadowing for a episode that we are doing later on for next week, talking about day of coordination. Was I was the day of coordinator for someone, meaning I hadn't done a lot of the prep work, and I just got given the list of vendors, timelines, and things, and the DJ hadn't showed up to this. Luckily, it was like a happy hour kind of informal event, but the DJ wasn't there. And it turned into one of those things where I was like, okay, let me tell the lead planner who hired me, I haven't seen the DJ. They were like, okay, maybe I'll reach out. And then it was like, we still haven't seen the DJ. So 30 minutes prior to the event start time, I'm like really pinging the lead person, being like, can you give me their phone number? I'm just going to call them. So we call. DJ was at home. DJ did not have the right date for said event, and DJ lived 45 minutes away, and the event started in 30 minutes. And so it was one of those of like, great, now I got to tell the lead planner and figure out how the lead planner wants me to, like, the lead planner wasn't on site. They were home, or at like another event. So I'm like, how do you want me to play this with the client to let them know the DJ's late? Also, do we have a Spotify playlist? And so we ended up having to pivot and do a last minute Spotify playlist. And the DJ showed up 15 minutes into the event going, very apologetic, ran in, said they would stay. They ended up staying like an hour late or something after their contracted time, just to try to make up for being late. But it was one of those moments where I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like personally my lesson learned there was I'm calling all my vendors, even if I'm a day of person, like the day before, just to be like, hi, confirming you have the right date. I'm sure anyone who listens who's a wedding vendor, I'm sure has even worse stories than that. But that was one that was a lesson learned. And then another one is more, I have a couple hosts that I work with in sports who I love dearly. They are great personalities. They're great on camera and everything. And I have one who just loves to wander, and not in a bad way, just loves to like talk to the fans and be everywhere. And so my team has it's kind of the running joke when we work this event is it's just me asking, where's this person's name? Like, for example, Mary, be like, where's Mary? Anybody have eyes on Mary? Because I can't see, like, we just can't see them. We can't find them in this huge stadium of people. And I'm like, we're 2 minutes away potentially from what I need them in this one position. And the only saving grace that I love is I do have an IFB, like an in-ear for them. So I'm able to talk to them on my radio, but they can't reply back in any way. It's just for them to listen. So it's just really funny because it's me just going like, hi, I'm down here in the southeast corner where we need you in about a minute. So if you can hear me, I hope you're running to me. Just check it. I hope you're coming close. And then I would always, this person was never missed a cue. They were always great on getting there in time. So I just always laughed. It was a running joke that they just like to keep my heart rate going. Because I am someone who just likes to be extra ready beforehand. And this person really is invested in like the fan experience, wants to chat with people who want to chat with them as they are moving through the stadium. But that is one that always gives me a little anxiety, but I get saved by that IFB every time.
That is super interesting, and something I'm wondering about when it's a TV show and there's like a host and they like somebody's coming in my ear. Is that what that is?
Yes, it is. And I will link, I have a YouTube video that I made all about it. So I will link that in this
Ooh.
episode, listeners, if you want to see a quick little 6-minute video about what an IFB is.
That's actually super cool. I'm gonna take a look for sure. I'm learning something. And then what you said about vendors earlier, something that I love to do, which is just a tip I wanted to throw in there too. When we send vendor know before you goes, I love at the very end saying, like in red, can you please confirm that you've received this email? Just to make sure your efforts have not gone to waste. And similar to what Logan said, like calling them, I just love getting a response that they've actually gotten eyes on that email and they're ready to rock. So love it. Love it, don't love it. So for me, technology, I feel like there are so many instances when technology has kind of gone astray. So Logan, our next section is technology trick or treat. So what's your most frightening tech failure story? Whether it's a power outage, some AV meltdown, I have to say, I feel like you probably have plenty of stories to share about this. So what's one that's top of mind, and how did you manage saving the event from becoming a nightmare?
I feel like I actually don't have as many that turned into like really big issues. I mean, listeners, you've heard my story about virtual event platforms back in 2020. Mary and I were both working in this event. And all of a sudden we heard reports from people that they couldn't get into the platform. And some of us were in a session just watching and we were fine. Turns out later on in our post-con, the building that housed the servers for the virtual event platform caught on fire. And specifically part of the website went down. If you were already in and you didn't hit refresh or touch anything, the platform was running. But if you tried to go back to the menu or like re-enter the event, it was just showing you that this website was down. And so that, as I was like the lead producer on that, I wasn't assigned to a session. And so I got just bombarded by the client with us trying to figure out how to message this. We were trying to get a hold of the tech company. And the moment they did not tell us it was a fire, they just said, oh, we're having some outages. We're looking at it. And ended up having to really quickly come up with like a templated email to send people to say, we are actively troubleshooting. We will let you know as soon as possible. And then once we were able to get back up, blast, that out to everybody. So that was tough. And that is one that is a question, again, add it to my who hurt you list of, I always ask event platforms if they've had any like platform wide outages. And if so, like how quick is their response time? What is the process if something like that goes down? Probably a reason why I trust Zoom more, because some of these like big ones, I feel like they have certain backup plans in place. And then my second one, I guess I would share, was again a virtual event platform, but this was we were using an AV company that was doing like streaming from a studio, and their physical studio was in Las Vegas. And so we were hosting it all in vMix, which is an online platform, but everything was getting pushed out of their Vegas office. And we ended up having an outage during the event that, again, anything virtual, listeners, is like dog years. It's like 6 times as long as it actually is. I can't remember. I'd have to go back to my notes. I feel like this outage might have only been like 3 minutes, but it felt like 20. And what it was that they had an internet outage in Vegas, but the studio that we had talked about ahead of time, that they had a backup or a redundancy in place, meaning they had a backup plan. They should have had 2 internet lines. One is our primary and then a secondary. Well, the rub was the secondary was provided by the primary. So if the primary goes down, it takes out the secondary as well because they're from the same company, which is like, it just feels silly. It was like the most like silly thing, and one of those things it kept me up for like weeks after this event, because I was like, why wouldn't I have thought to ask? But I was like, I asked about a redundancy and they said yes, they had a redundancy. Like, who would have thought to be like, and it's another company, right? Like, that just, I don't know, it felt like an obvious question, so I didn't ask it. And that turned into a really big, just kind of, again, post in the moment we were able to react to it. It got running after 3 minutes, and they just put, apology in the chat and stuff like that. But more in terms of like client management, especially because this had been a pretty big client with a lot of money invested in this platform. So, Mary, how about you? What was one of your technology trick or treats that you've experienced?
I just feel like technology gives me like the heebie-jeebies. There's just so much that can go wrong with it, and it feels like a huge issue when it happens, for sure, because it's usually program related. But I mean, I'll choose something a little simpler. I really liked your examples, Logan. What we were just doing an event, and the in-house AV company broke the gobo, and we didn't have another one, and it was the key element behind the stage. So they were able to pivot, and I'm grateful for that. They were like, we got a backup plan. We're just gonna do a screen. We're gonna do a projection with your logo. It worked out, but there was a lot of work put in to get this gobo and make it right, and then it got broken. So just kind of a bummer. So then I was like, I don't know, lesson learned, have 2 gobos, but you don't necessarily need 2 of them. So I think it was just an unfortunate moment, and I'm glad that they were able to pivot.
Not a broken gobo.
Mhm.
Oh gosh, that's a good one. Well, our next one we got here is guests from the underworld. Mary, have you ever had to deal with an unruly guest or a group that maybe causes chaos at your event? And how did you deal with these, in our spooky theme, monsters?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had some. It's not terribly common. It's usually someone who is very intoxicated, and that is what it comes down to. There's always some rude people, but there was this one guy, I've probably shared about him before, but he's the bruschetta guy, and he chipped his tooth on a piece of bruschetta because it was kind of, a crusty piece of bread. And he was very, very, very upset about it. And he continued to tell me about it multiple times. He would keep coming back and he's like, I want to talk to the chef about this bruschetta. And so now I just like every time I see that on like a past appetizer plate, I just laugh. I'm like, and I hope nobody chips their teeth on the bread. So it ended up okay. We actually did have to tell security and they escorted him out because it was pretty intense. He was like yelling and like making a scene and I felt uncomfortable. And so they supported me, which was nice. So yeah, I would say that's a guest from the underworld. I definitely don't want to come across him ever again. Logan, what about you? Do you have an experience?
I feel like for us, I've had more of when I work in sports of people just kind of casually trying to sneak into places they shouldn't sneak into. And it is one of my favorite things is having to intercept these people. Just again, these are usually they're just being a regular person, but just trying to be sneaky. And so I usually just diffuse it with overt kindness and asking questions of, can I help you find your seat or where you're trying to go? Or unfortunately, you are unable to go on the court right now. Please go back to your seat. But I hear what you're saying, Mary, because I feel like if you have events, luckily, I don't feel like I do that many events where it is very like an heavy alcohol fueled event. Like they're definitely an element of the things I do, but I'm sure some of you listeners, if you're someone who works like a beer festival or any of even like our friends who do concerts, like I'm sure they have to deal so much more with kind of unruly folks. I feel like the only other one is I always, as a backup plan, again, more from the virtual event world, is just talking through with your client about like what to do if people are going rogue in the chat and saying anything inappropriate. Like, is it a flag it and somebody from your team's going to do it? Or like, do I just bounce them? We screenshot it and we bounce them and, we'll deal with it later. But like talking through that process. And then if you're someone who's trying to use new technology that you're not as familiar with, make sure you know how to remove somebody. And what that means is that like you're banning them, they can never come back, or is it you literally just kick them out and they can come back in? Like just thinking through, I don't think like Zoom bombing's as common now as it was of people coming in, trying to get into people's Zoom calls and do something inappropriate. But like that's one that I know technology can feel like a scary, you talked about it, Mary. I think technology can be scary for people. And so, and something as simple in person as like what you did is like call security, gets them out of there. Virtually, unfortunately, that will fall most often on the host or the person who's like controlling that platform. And so just making sure you're familiar with how to kick people out if they say anything inappropriate. To just, again, save you time, save your audience, because the worst, just like in person, the worst thing to do when something like that happens is freeze. And that just makes everything worse. So we don't want any guests from the underworld at our future events.
For our next section, Logan, I think we could just talk about any general horror stories that we might have. So ghost stories, what else do you want to cover? And I actually do have one that's on the tip of my tongue that I love to share. I keep like
Go
saying, can I go first?
Go.
Okay, so this just happened and Logan was there. So this actually this was not a ghost story, but it could have been. So I just want to share it so y'all can bask in its glory with me. But we had like a giant piece of steak at an event. And it was like, I don't know, 15 pounds or something. It was heavy. So I did have someone help me carry it because I didn't want to be responsible for doing that by myself. But this was at an auction and it ended up getting auctioned off for thousands of dollars. I think over $12,000. And basically, I and someone else took it up and down the stairs of the stage to get it on the stage. And so after it got auctioned off and we're taking it off, I just was like, oh my gosh, what if we drop it? I am going to drop a $12,000 steak right now in front of everybody in the room. Like, what if that happened? Especially because I was going up and down the stairs backwards. I was like, oh my gosh. And I would be the person to drop it. I'm a pretty clumsy person. And so I was absolutely terrified the entire time. I'm still stressed out about it. And I'm so glad it didn't happen because can you just imagine? And so that was a happy story, but it could have been absolutely one of the worst things that had ever happened to me at an event if it had happened.
Yeah, that's kind of scary. I think for me, I was just like, when we were noting this episode, I like noted down a couple ghost stories, which listeners, I'm going to let you try to infer if these are real or just more like horror stories that all of us are like, oh, dear God, I would never want to have to deal with a situation like that. So one ghost story for us event planners is too many lines of communication with a client. Is it email? Is it Google Drive? Is it Dropbox? Is it SharePoint, Slack, other documents, text messages? Oh, so many different lines of communication. That is terrifying to me. Also, getting a text that says, "What was the incident?" or "Did something happen?" with no context. Just that text. I could just feel like already hearing that, my heart drops to my stomach. Um, Another one is running an event that has no run times. We're just running it in order and we're just rolling. Who knows? We're going to figure it out. A client who sends every email on a separate thread. There's no such thing as joint threads, just individual emails over and over again. And my last one, Mary, I feel like we've experienced this together at times, but comms going dead mid-event. Whether it's an outage or something dies or something, just silence. I feel like sometimes to me, silence on headset is like the scariest thing at events. And sometimes it's because nothing's happening that we need to be talking about. But multiple times it'll be like, comms check, you guys are still there? Okay, just making sure. Mary, what about you? Any other ghost stories?
I think that those are the big ones that, I mean, honestly, there's so many, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. But one thing that I was thinking as we're thinking of like lessons learned just from all of these is that I do think it's part of our role as like event professionals to be able to manage these situations when they do occur. So I do think we need to roll with the punches and, just be able to make it happen. And one thing I was thinking is there's a lot that we could do pre-event to make sure that there aren't as many fires, but even as prepared as you are, there's always things that don't go according to plan, of course. So I was thinking like similar to firefighters, they do like fire prevention, but they also actually put out fires, and we have to do the same thing in the event world. Obviously it's different, but if you know what I mean. And so I the more that I understand that it's part of our role, it helps me be less frustrated when things like this happen, because it's sort of just the nature of the game. And so that's my last thought when it comes to ghost stories and all those things. Logan, do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom?
No, I love that analogy. That's really good. I mean, I think that, yeah, my plan with, or anytime with clients, I never promise that the event's going to be perfect, because that's an impossible promise to make, because, out of 100 events, maybe one truly perfectly gets executed with everything according to plan and nothing you had to troubleshoot. So my pep talk to clients is you just trust you've got the right people in the right roles, and we've talked through backup plans. So we're all going to react to whatever the situation throws our way, in a calm, cool, and collected manner. And I'm with you, Mary. I do think as much as we want things to go according to plan, some of these horror stories, but also ways that we get to shine as event planners and event producers, like with our skill set, is when things go wrong and how quick we're able to react to them and how we handle them. Like that is when you get to kind of show some of your, stretch those muscles. So while I don't wish really chaotic events on anybody, I feel like I personally, as a perfectionist, I've tried to then make sure that I'm not holding myself to an impossible standard of 100% correct, but that a 90% or even an 80% is a pretty darn good event. So I've tried to flip some of my measurement of successes more into my clients. And if they seem happy and they're satisfied with the event, then I'm happy and I'm satisfied with the event. Even if I have notes for myself or some of the people I work with that I go, that's a me thing, and that's fine. But if the client's happy, I'm happy.
I love that. I think that's awesome. So many lessons to learn, but this was a fun episode. And so I'm glad we took time to talk about our monster size mistakes, our ghost stories, all of the things. And before we are at the end of our episode, of course, we have our bonus tip, which is by Logan today.
Yes, this week's bonus tip is related to in-house AV companies. And you might hate how some of the in-house AV companies like to make their quotes to match the BEO, the banquet event order. And it can be really hard to track, like, what equipment do you have for what days? Because the BEO is usually by day, and AV orders, that's just hard to track. And they're such big documents. I recently was talking with a technical director, a TD from the AV side of things, and he really highlighted to me that you can push back on the in-house AV company and ask them to put it in a standard AV format way with a gear list, the price per item, the quantity, and the unit of measure, which is usually like the number of days you're renting it for, or a lot of equipment is a week rental, or just hours even for your crew. So you might initially receive it like in the format of a BEO, but please ask them to break it out separately and put it in more of an AV order list. That is not an unreasonable ask. And that is something, if you use a third-party vendor, that's how they're going to give it to you. So in-house AV companies are incentivized to get you to work with them. So they should be willing to work with whatever formatting is easier for you.
I love it. Great bonus tip. Thank you so much, Logan. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can email us at bettereventspod@gmail.com. We also love to hear from you on LinkedIn if you want to connect with Logan and I directly. And if you want more Better Events content, make sure that you register for the 2024 Better Events Conference at bettereventspod.com/conference. We would love to see you there. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you again next Wednesday.